The first expedition to reach the geographic South Pole was led by the Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen. He and 4 others arrived at the pole on the 14th of December 1911, 5 weeks ahead of a British party led by Robert Falcon Scott as part of the Terra Nova Expedition. Amundsen and his team returned safely to the base, and later learned that Scott and his 4 companions had died on the return journey. Amundsen's initial plans had focused on the Arctic and the conquest of the North Pole by means of an extended drift in an icebound ship. He obtained the use of Fridtjof Nansen's polar exploration ship Fram, and undertook extensive fundraising. Preparations for this expedition were disrupted when, in 1909, the rival American explorers Frederick Cook and Robert E. Peary each claimed to have reached the North Pole. Amundsen then changed his plan and began to prepare for a conquest of the South Pole, uncertain of the extent to which the public and his backers would support him. He kept this revised objective secret. When he set out in June 1910, he led even his crew to believe they were embarking on an Arctic drift, and revealed the true Antarctic destination only when Fram was leaving the last port of call, Madeira. Amundsen made his Antarctic base, which he named Framheim, in the Bay of Whales on the Great Ice Barrier. After months of preparation, depot laying and a false start that ended in near disaster, he and his party set out for the pole in October 1911. In the course of their journey they discovered the Axel Heiberg Glacier, which provided the route to the polar plateau and ultimately to the South Pole. The party's mastery of the use of skis and their expertise with sledge dogs ensured rapid and relatively trouble-free travel. Other achievements of the expedition included the first exploration of King Edward VII Land and an extensive oceanographic cruise. The expedition's success was widely applauded. The story of Scott's heroic failure overshadowed its achievement in the United Kingdom. Unable to accept that a Norwegian had been the first person to set foot in the South Pole, but not in the rest of the world, Amundsen's decision to keep his true plans secret until the last moment was criticized by some. Recent polar historians have more fully recognized the skill and courage of Amundsen's party. The permanent scientific base at the pole bears his name, together with that of Scott. Background: Amundsen was born in Fredrikstad, Norway, in 1872, the son of a ship owner. In 1893, he abandoned his medical studies at Christiania University and signed up as a seaman aboard the Silla Magdalena for a voyage to the Arctic. After several further voyages he qualified as a second mate when not at sea. He developed his skills as a cross-country skier in the harsh environment of Norway's Hardangervidda Plateau. In 1896, inspired by the polar exploits of his countryman Fridtjof Nansen, Amundsen joined the Belgian Antarctic expedition as mate, aboard Belgica under Adrian de Gerlache. Early in 1898 the ship became trapped by pack ice in the Bellingshausen Sea, and was held fast for almost a year. The expedition thus became, involuntarily, the first to spend a complete winter in Antarctic waters, a period marked by depression, near starvation, insanity, and scurvy among the crew. Amundsen remained dispassionate, recording everything and using the experience as an education in all aspects of polar exploration techniques, particularly aids, clothing and diet. Belgica's voyage marked the beginning of what became known as the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, and was rapidly followed by expeditions from the United Kingdom, Sweden, Germany and France. However, on his return to Norway in 1899, Amundsen turned his attention northwards. Confident in his abilities to lead an expedition, he planned a traversal of the Northwest Passage, the then uncharted sea route from the Atlantic to the Pacific through the labyrinth of North Canadian islands. Having earned his master's ticket, Amundsen acquired a small sloop, GJOet, which he adapted for Arctic travel. He secured the patronage of King Oscar of Sweden and Norway, the support of Nansen, and sufficient financial backing to set out in June 1903 with a crew of 6. The voyage lasted until 1906 and was wholly successful. The Northwest Passage, which defeated mariners for centuries, was finally conquered. At the age of 34, Amundsen became a national hero, in the first rank of polar explorers. In November 1906, the American Robert Peary returned from his latest unsuccessful quest for the North Pole, claiming a new farthest north of 87 degrees 6, a record disputed by later historians. He immediately began raising funds for a further attempt. In July 1907, Dr. Frederick Cook, a former shipmate of Amundsen's from Belgica, set off northwards on what was ostensibly a hunting trip but was rumored to be an attempt on the North Pole. A month later, Ernest Shackleton's Nimrod expedition sailed for Antarctica, while Robert Falcon Scott was preparing a further expedition should Shackleton fail. Amundsen saw no reason to concede priority in the south to the British, and spoke publicly about the prospects of leading an Antarctic expedition, although his preferred goal remained the North Pole. Preparation. Nansen and Fram. In 1893, Nansen had driven his ship Fram into the Arctic pack ice off the northern Siberian coast and allowed it to drift in the ice towards Greenland, hoping that this route would cross the North Pole. In the event, the drift did not approach the pole, and an attempt by Nansen and Hjalmar Johansen to reach it on foot was likewise unsuccessful. Nevertheless, Nansen's strategy became the basis of Amundsen's own Arctic plans. He reasoned that if he entered the Arctic Ocean via the Bering Strait, well to the east of Nansen's starting point, his ship would achieve a more northerly drift and pass nearer through the pole. Amundsen consulted Nansen, who insisted that Fram was the only vessel fit for such an undertaking. Fram had been designed and built in 1891–93 by Colin Archer, Norway's leading shipbuilder and naval architect, in accordance with Nansen's exacting specifications, as a vessel that would withstand prolonged exposure to the harshest of Arctic conditions. The ship's most distinctive feature was its rounded hull which, according to Nansen, enabled the vessel to slip like an eel out of the embraces of the ice. For extra strength, the hull was sheathed in South American greenheart, the hardest timber available, and crossbeams and braces were fitted throughout its length. The ship's wide beam of 36 feet in relation to its overall length of 128 feet gave it a markedly stubby appearance. This shape improved its strength in the ice but affected its performance in the open sea, where it moved sluggishly and was inclined to roll most uncomfortably. However, its looks, speed, and sailing qualities were secondary to the provision of a secure and warm shelter for the crew during a voyage that might extend over several years. Fram had emerged virtually unscathed from Nansen's expedition after nearly 3 years in the polar ice. On its return it had been refitted, before spending 4 years under the command of Otto Sverdrup, charting and exploring 100,000 square miles of uninhabited territory in the northern Canadian islands. After Sverdrup's voyage ended in 1902, Fram was laid up in Christiania. Although the ship was technically the property of the state, it was tacitly acknowledged that Nansen had first call on it. After his return from the Arctic in 1896, he had aspired to take Fram on an expedition to Antarctica. occur, but by 1907 such hopes had faded. Late in September of that year, Amundsen was summoned to Nansen's home and told he could have the ship. Initial steps. Amundsen made his plans public on the 10th of November 1908 at a meeting of the Norwegian Geographical Society. He would take from round Cape Horn to the Pacific Ocean. After provisioning in San Francisco, the ship would continue northwards, through the Bering Strait to Point Barrow. From here he would set a course directly into the ice to begin a drift that would extend over 4 or 5 years. Science would be as important as geographical exploration. Continuous observations would, Amundsen hoped, help to explain a number of unresolved problems. The plan was received enthusiastically, and the next day King Haakon opened a subscription list with a gift of 20,000 kroner. On the 6th of February 1909, the Norwegian Parliament approved a grant of 75,000 kroner to refit the ship. The general fundraising and business management of the expedition was placed in the hands of Amundsen's brother Leon so that the explorer could concentrate on the more practical aspects of organization. In March 1909 it was announced the Shackleton had reached a southern latitude of 88 degrees 23.97 nautical miles from the South Pole, before turning back. Thus, as Amundsen observed, in the south a little corner remained. He was unreserved in his praise for Shackleton's achievement, writing the Shackleton was the South's equivalent of Nansen in the north. Following this near miss, Scott immediately confirmed his intention to lead an expedition that would encompass the Little Corner and claim the prize for the British Empire. Personnel. Amundsen chose 3 naval lieutenants as his expedition's officers: Thorvald Nilsen, a navigator who would be second in command, Hjalmar Fredrik Gjertsen, and Christian Prestrud. Gjertsen, despite lacking a medical background, was made expedition doctor, and was sent on their lightning course in surgery and dentistry. A naval gunner, Oscar Wisting, was accepted on Prestrud's recommendation because he could turn his hand to most tasks. Although he had little previous experience of sledge dogs, Amundsen wrote that Wisting developed a way of his own with them, and became a useful amateur veterinarian. An early choice for the party was Olav Bjaaland, a champion skier who was a skilled carpenter and ski maker. Bjaaland was from Morgedal in the Telemark province of Norway, a region renowned for the prowess of its skiers and is the home of the pioneer of modern techniques, Sonde Norheim. Amundsen shared Nansen's belief that skis and sledge dogs provided by far the most efficient method of Arctic transport, and was determined to recruit the most skillful dog drivers. Helmer Hansen, who had proved his worth on the GJOA expedition, agreed to travel with Amundsen again. He was joined later by Sverre Hassel, an expert on dogs, and veteran of Sverdrup's 1898–1902 Fram voyage, who were intended only to travel with Amundsen as far as San Francisco. Mindful of the value of a competent cook, Amundsen secured the services of Adolf Lindström, another Sverdrup veteran who had been cook aboard GJOA. From his experiences on board Belgica and GJOA, Amundsen had learned the importance on long voyages of stable and compatible companions, and with these experienced personnel he felt he had the core of his expedition. He continued to recruit through 1909. The Fram party would eventually total 19. All of these except one were Amundsen's personal choices. The exception was Hjalmar Johansen, who was taken on at the request of Nansen. Since his epic march with Nansen, Johansen had been unable to settle down. Despite the efforts of Nansen and others to help him, his life became a spiral of drink and indebtedness. Nansen wished to give his former comrade a final chance to show that he was still a capable worker in the field, feeling that he could not refuse Nansen's wishes. Amundsen reluctantly accepted Johansen. The party contained 2 foreigners, a young Russian oceanographer Alexander Kuchen, who was a pupil of Björn Helland Hansen, and a Swedish engineer, Knut Sundbeck. Change of plan. In September 1909, newspapers carried reports that Cook and Peary had each reached the North Pole. Cook in April 1908 and Peary a year later. Asked to comment, Amundsen avoided an outright endorsement of either explorer, but surmised that probably something will be left to be done. While he avoided the controversy over the rival claims, he saw immediately that his own plans would be seriously affected. Without the allure of capturing the pole, he would struggle to maintain public interest or funding. If the expedition was to be saved, there was nothing left for me but to try and solve the last great problem, the South Pole. Thus Amundsen decided to go south. The Arctic drift could wait for a year or 2 until the South Pole had been conquered. Amundsen did not publicize his change of plan. As Scott's biographer David Crane points out, the expedition's public and private funding was earmarked for scientific work in the Arctic. There was no guarantee that the backers would understand or agree to the proposed volte-face. Furthermore, the altered objective might cause Nansen to revoke the use of Fram, or Parliament to halt the expedition for fear of undermining Scott and offending the British. Amundsen concealed his intentions from everyone except his brother Leon and his second-in-command, Nilsen. This secrecy led to awkwardness. Scott had sent Amundsen instruments to enable the 2 expeditions, at opposite ends of the Earth, to make comparative readings. When Scott, in Norway to test his motor sledges, telephoned Amundsen's home to discuss cooperation, the Norwegian would not take the call. The privately revised expedition schedule required Fram to leave Norway in August 1910 and sail to Madeira in the Atlantic, its only port of call. Further, the ship would proceed directly to the Ross Sea in Antarctica, heading for the Bay of Whales, an inlet on the Ross ice shelf where Amundsen intended to make his base camp. The Bay of Whales was the southernmost point in the Ross Sea to which a ship could penetrate, 60 nautical miles closer to the pole than Scott's intended base at McMurdo Sound. In 1907–09, Shackleton had considered the ice in the Bay of Whales to be unstable, but from his studies of Shackleton's records, Amundsen decided that the barrier here was grounded on shoals or skerries, and would support a safe and secure base. After landing, the shore party, Fram, was to carry out oceanographic work in the Atlantic before picking up the shore party early in the following year. Transport, equipment and supplies. Amundsen did not understand the apparent aversion of British explorers to dogs. Can it be that the dog has not understood its master? Or is it the master who has not understood the dog? He later wrote, following his decision to go south, he ordered 100 North Greenland sledge dogs, the best and strongest available. Besides the durability as pack animals, dogs could be fed to other dogs and could provide fresh meat for the men in the polar party. The party's ski boots, specially designed by Amundsen, were the product of 2 years' testing and modification in search of perfection. The party's polar clothing included suits of seal skin from northern Greenland, and clothes fashioned after the style of the Netsinik Inuit from reindeer skins, wolf skin, Burberry cloth and gabardine. The sledges were constructed from Norwegian ash with steel shod runners made from American hickory. Skis, also fashioned from hickory, were extra long to reduce the likelihood of slipping into crevasses. The tents, the strongest and most practical that have ever been used, had built-in floors and required a single pole. For cooking on the march, Amundsen chose the Swedish Primus stove rather than the special cooker devised by Nansen, because he felt the latter took up too much space. From his experiences on Belgica, Amundsen was aware of the dangers of scurvy. Although the true cause of the disease, vitamin C deficiency, was not understood at the time, it was generally known that the disease could be countered by eating fresh meat. To neutralize the danger, Amundsen planned to supplement sledging rations with regular helpings of seal meat. He also ordered a special kind of pemmican which included vegetables and oatmeal, a more stimulating, nourishing and appetizing food it would be impossible to find. The expedition was well supplied with wines and spirits, for use as medicine and on festive or social occasions. Mindful of the loss of morale on Belgica, Amundsen provided for leisure time with a library of around 3,000 books, a gramophone, a large quantity of records and a range of musical instruments. Departure. In the months before departure, funds for the expedition became harder to acquire. Because of limited public interest, newspaper deals were cancelled and Parliament refused a request for a further 25,000 kroner. Amundsen mortgaged his house to keep the expedition afloat, heavily in debt. He was now wholly dependent on the expedition's success to avoid personal financial ruin. After a month's trial cruise in the northern Atlantic, Fram sailed to Kristiansand in late July 1910 to take the dogs on board and to make final preparations for departure. While at Kristiansand, Amundsen received an offer of help from Peter Don Pedro Christoffersen, a Norwegian expatriate whose brother was Norway's minister in Buenos Aires. Christoffersen would provide fuel and other provisions to Fram at either Montevideo or Buenos Aires, an offer which Amundsen gratefully accepted. Just before Fram sailed on the 9th of August, Amundsen revealed the expedition's true destination to the two junior officers Prestrud and Gjertsen. On the 4-week voyage to Funchal in Madeira, a mood of uncertainty developed among the crew, who could not make sense of some of the preparations and whose questions were met with evasive answers from their officers. This, says Amundsen's biographer Roland Huntford, was enough to generate suspicion and low spirits. Fram reached Funchal on the 6th of September. 3 days later, Amundsen informed the crew of the revised plan. He told them he intended to make a detour to the South Pole on the way to the North Pole, which was still his ultimate destination, but would have to wait for a while. After Amundsen outlined his new proposals, each man was asked whether he was willing to go on, and all responded positively. Amundsen wrote a lengthy letter of explanation to Nansen, stressing how the North Pole claims of Cook and Perry had dealt a death blow to his original plans. He felt he had been forced into this action by necessity, asked for forgiveness and expressed the hope that his achievements would ultimately atone for any offense. Before leaving Funchal on the 9th of September, Amundsen sent a cable to Scott to inform him of the change of plan. Scott's ship Terra Nova had left Cardiff amid much publicity on the 15th of June, and was due to arrive in Australia early in October. It was to Melbourne that Amundsen sent his telegram, containing the bare information that he was proceeding southwards. No indication was given of the Norwegian's plans at his destination in Antarctica. Scott wrote to the Royal Geographical Society secretary, John Scott Kelty, "We shall know in due course, I suppose." News of Amundsen's revised plans reached Norway early in October and provoked a generally hostile response. Although Nansen gave his blessing and warm approval, Amundsen's actions were, with few exceptions, condemned by press and public, and funding dried up almost completely. Reactions in Britain were predictably adverse. An initial disbelief expressed by Kelty soon turned to anger and scorn. "I have sent full details of Amundsen's underhand conduct to Scott. "If un was Scott, I would not let them land," wrote Sir Clements Markham, the influential former RGS president. Unaware of the world's reactions, Fram sailed south for 4 months. The first icebergs were sighted on New Year's Day 1911. The barrier itself came into view on the 11th of January, and on the 14th of January Fram was in the Bay of Whales.